I offer my appreciation to the Alliance for Peacebuilding team, especially Jessica and Sarah, in bringing this meeting together and continuing the conversations begun at the first Evidence Summit, as well as during PeaceCon last year. In keeping with the theme of the summit, exploring evidence on strategically partnering with local religious actors and faith-based organizations to support more effective whole of society programming and policies, today's conversation will consider how funders approach strategic partnership with local organizations and faith actors. There's a wide spectrum of approaches that donors take and engage in how they engage and partner with local communities, including religious actors. And the panelists here today represent some of those different approaches. So in our panel today, I will first lay out the context for our conversation, why we are here, what do we hope to achieve, and then we want to open it up to questions from the audience. We'll answer some of these preliminary questions. I'll ask the panel to share a bit about themselves, their organizations, and respond to a question. And then we'll take more questions from the audience. We really want to make sure we are responsive to your questions and curiosities, so please put them in the Q&A section. But before I begin, let me quickly introduce the panelists. Their bios, more complete bios, are available on the Evidence Summit page. We have today Alex Thoma, Executive Director of the Peace and Security Funders Group, Flor Schuling, Program Director at Mensen Med in Misi, and Jesse Eves, Senior Director at Humanity United. We unfortunately are missing Cameron Chisholm from the DT Institute. And I'm Mary Dawson. I'm a Program Manager with GHR Foundation. GHR has worked in the interreligious action area or field for about 10 years. And there's a report on our efforts and what we've learned from our work in IRA over that time. Sarah will drop a link to that report in the chat section. For GHR, we really looked for opportunities where actors from different faiths could come together and address a common problem in their community. These issues range from health to child marriage, girl education, to training on conflict mediation. We often worked with the inter and multi-religious organizations that Professor Karam just spoke of in her opening plenary. We also funded efforts to address needs of the community of faith actors in peace building, from supporting development of specific tools like the Effective Interreligious Action in Peace Building and the related guide, Faith Matters, a guide for the design, monitoring, and evaluation of interreligious peace building. That resource is designed for faith actors. Search for Common Ground and USIP developed a common ground approach to religious engagement in peace building, and that resource is really designed for those working in peace building who may be unfamiliar with or even wary of religious engagement, or who are looking to gain greater confidence in working with religious actors and institutions. Both resources are really well done, and I encourage people to look at them. And last, we supported capacity projects for faith organizations that tried to support them and their efforts to highlight the values that underpin their efforts, many of which you have heard yesterday: reconciliation, subsidiarity, and accompaniment. What does it mean when an organization actually leads with those values? So for the context, now to the context of our discussion today. We recognize that religious leaders are local decision makers who are highly trusted in their community. Across the globe, religious leaders and faith communities are making significant contributions to sustainable development. They are often highly influential figures that serve as moral leaders as well as decision makers at the community level. USAID has reinforced that working in partnership with such leaders and designing programs with the religious context in mind contributes to more effective and sustainable foreign assistance efforts. Because religious leaders are often cultural experts, they can ensure a foreign intervention program is culturally and socially appropriate for the intended context of implementation. Their efforts have and are being documented, and we'll learn a bit more about that effort in the next session. Further, we recognize that religion is a formidable power in and of itself, capable of impeding and also furthering change. For most people around the globe, religious norms, values, and rituals are critical and strengthening the sense of belonging to a group, facilitating the practice of solidarity with others. Religion is a connecting power and subsequently weaves societies together, contributing to social cohesion. With more than 85% of the world population holding religious values, religion is an integral part of communities' cultural heritage and provides a framework for shaping norms and values. It is a source of solace and inspiration. Thus, religion is a fundamental consideration for development and philanthropic themes such as security, human rights, education, and health. So how do we, as funders, make space for faith, for inter and multi-faith organizations and their leadership at the table, especially in peace building and humanitarian development work? How do we follow our whole of society programming without including faith? Today's conversation, again, will shed light on funders' considerations in engaging with faith. How are we positioned to help build bridges, to foster evidence-based practices, and to advance the opportunity of strategically partnering with faith actors? We will try to shed light on what we look for in partnership, what effective strategic engagement and partnership looks like at our specific foundations, and what we have heard works, where we see demand, and what we see as needed. And finally, how we listen deeply to our community partners. And I would like to welcome Cameron Chisholm from the DT Institute. He has joined us. Welcome, Cameron. But with that, Sarah, do we have any questions in the chat yet that we should respond to?
Not yet, Mary, but folks, you're welcome to drop in questions in the Q&A.
Okay, great. If not, I'll start with a question to Alex Toma. Alex, again, is the director of the Peace and Security Funders Group. Alex, what can you tell us about the state of peace building funding in the US or globally?
It's very, very small. I don't think I need to tell the grantee partners or frankly, like my fellow funders here that there's not a lot of money. I mean, you're basically looking at it. I mean, joking, but it's a tiny, tiny amount. Actually, I will put in the chat, hold on. So the Peace and Security Index is a tool that the Peace and Security Funders Group puts out, have put out as a resource to the funding community, as well as the grantee partner community, to find who's funding what, where, and how across peace and security issues, from peace building to nuclear security. And I won't start us off too depressing, but I will say that the entire peace and security space, like from nuclear weapons to preventing genocide, is less than 1% of all philanthropic giving. Let's stop there. So it's less than 1% goes to the war in Ukraine and the famine and human rights violations in Yemen or Myanmar. So kind of let that sink in. And of that, even less goes to peace building. I don't want to cite the numbers because they change on an annual basis, and I don't have the latest, but it's a tiny fraction. Overall, we have about 300-400 million within the PSFG network. We have about 60 foundations, public, private, operating foundations, as well as individual philanthropists. So, and we have most of the peace and security funders in the world as members of the network. So that gives you a sort of scope of how little money there is in the peace building space. But I do invite everybody to use the funding map. It's wonderful. It gets updated daily with data from the best data we have on who is funding what, how, and where in the world. But it's very small, very, 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 very small.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. And even within that, as you said, from nuclear security to addressing genocides and famine, and then even down to conflict mitigation, like all of these areas filter into the Peace and Security Funders Group. So we're really tackling everything with a small group and a small amount of funding. But thrilled to be in partnership with you all. I'll move over or let me check. Sarah, are there any questions in the chat?
Yeah, Mary, I just saw one. I put it in the.
Oh
hosted
yeah, I see it
chat.
now.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is, what advice would you provide to new and small organizations seeking small funding opportunities? We'll get to that, but I'm gonna build us up to that opportunity, that question. So Flora and Jesse, if I can turn to you, and Flora, I'll ask you first. How do you think about partners when you are working in community, or you've arrived in community, or how do you meet new partners, and what qualities and capacities are you looking for?
Yeah, so this is a short question that potentially has a very long answer, but because my organization has a very long history, we're 90 years old, and so we also have a long history in most of the countries where we work, which is around 15 countries, and consequently our local network is quite extensive and strong, and because we travel and we have our local focal points, we're there, so we know we know who's who, some well, not everyone, but so we know who has the legitimacy, authenticity, credibility, and also perseverance to generate change in the topics where we work on, which is peace and conflict, or gender equality and countering gender-based violence. So it's usually through our network, I think exclusively through our network, that we also come across new actors that we then think, hey, these might be interesting, and we need to add them to our partner network as well. And these can be organizations, faith-based organizations, but also individuals. We're more and more experimenting with how to also support individuals, which is a challenge in itself. Yeah.
Great. Thanks. And do you want to share anything further on Mensen Met in BC at this point?
Yeah, and maybe also on the question that was asked, I don't know, because I see the questions about starting philanthropy and small funding, and I think like religious actors, to support religious actors, they can be overwhelmed with big funds, and there's many organizations who do not have the organizational capacity to actually do small grants, but can only manage the bigger ones because it's more efficient, etc. So I think the small grants are very much welcome in this religious sphere. So that's I applaud that initiative very much.
Thanks. Yeah, that picks up on a theme that was talked about yesterday. There was a specific question about like needing that small amount of funding, and the difficulty. And Alex, I don't know if you can talk to this, what you've heard from the Peace and Security Funders Group, that is, it's hard for at least US groups to get small amounts of money overseas because of the cost and the burden because of US tax laws that it puts on foundations. And so then you start looking for that sub-grantee.
Exactly.
Component.
Yeah, and I'll drop it in the chat. I'll just say one quick thing. There was a I don't know, it was a few years ago where we were in a meeting with, there were sort of PSFG members, private, philanthropic donors, in a meeting with USAID. And I remember someone from USAID saying, well, it's really hard for us to get money less than $250,000. And I was like, what? Like $250,000? Like they were like, yeah, we don't really do anything smaller than that because it's a lot of work. And I was thinking, oh my God, it would be amazing. Yeah, that kind of, but to Flora's point, I think, absorbing that amount of money is really challenging. And so that is why we try to partner with, the public sector as much as possible to sort of, actually, in the thing that, Mary, GHR and PSFG were involved in many years ago in the Central African Republic. The idea was that, private funders could come in first. This is the CAR Peace Building partnership that I'm thinking of. that private funders could come in first very quickly with small amounts of money, and then the US government could come in once the sort of infrastructure and once the sort of capacity was at least a little bit built up on the ground. In terms of the actual specific question, what I would say is, I mean, I'm going to keep pointing back to the funding map. I'm really pushing it. You would think that I would be getting kickbacks, but it's our map. So no, actually, I would say that and I put a very wonky long link in there, but it's the way you kind of can search for peace building. If you go there, it just says literally like I don't remember how many funders there are, a few hundred funders. And you can sort it by the largest funders, and I haven't done this yet, but the largest, and that's the big grants we're talking about. And then it goes down to like the $2,000, $1,000, whatever. So you can see the funders that have the capacity to do smaller size grants. So we're talking under $25,000, just sort it that way, and then kind of see which funders those are, and then, reach out to them specifically if they have an open call. If not, then, it's the usual advice I give is, do you know somebody who's on that board? Do you know someone who's on the staff? Can you get an introduction from one of your current funders who might know that funder? Things like that.
Yeah, thanks. And Jesse, I'll turn it to you. Same question. Tell us a little bit more about Humanity United and how you find partners and and a little bit more about your work.
Sure. So hi, everybody. And, obviously thrilled to be here and really enjoyed the different panels and keynotes that have taken place over the past day so far. So just excited to be able to jump in here, and you're going to hear me probably reference and talk about a lot of the same themes that we've been hearing, I think, throughout the past day. So in terms of Humanity United, so we're a private foundation based in the US. We were started by Pam and Pierre Omidyar, who founded the website eBay. So we're one of in their universe of philanthropies. And so we have physical offices in Washington, DC and San Francisco, but in our new, Zoomlandia, we now have staff kind of scattered all over. And at our core, we seek to support work that cultivates the conditions that hopefully will transform violent conflict and exploitation into enduring peace and freedom. And so specifically, that means we work predominantly on peace building and on combating human trafficking. We also have an intersecting portfolio of work that we call public engagement, which is communication, policy and government relations, and a body of work that supports investigative journalism around the world. And all of that in particular, I think, goes to a question that I can get to later on in terms of the various forms of support we can provide, or we try to provide beyond just the check. But just look specifically at our peace building approach, because it's going to inform how I answer a lot of these questions. So our goal is to work towards a peace building system where local peace actors are playing a leading role in the design and implementation of peace in their society. So we imagine a peace building system where international cooperation on peace and conflict, or peace and violent conflict, is really defined by those that live closest to the conflict and really honors their vision for sustainable peace. So the way we get there is by supporting those that are closest to the work. And at the end of the day, we want to work towards what peace looks like for those local peace actors. What is their definition of peace? Not the definition that is given by a donor or an international NGO. And so at the end of the day, we just try to invest in relationships that build peace. And in terms of I think the question on like how we meet new partners, as Alex was saying, like the funding is small at the end of the day. Most of our grants are between $30,000 and $150,000, depending on the partner. It's also we're always eager to have conversations and engage with people. Over the past several years, we have pivoted towards a much more long-term approach that focuses on much more flexible support. But our budget hasn't gotten any bigger, which means that it's very difficult to sometimes add new partners, because that means someone else has, another partner has either, left our funding ecosystem, or we never will just like cut a partner. There's always kind of a what we talk about, a dignified exit, where we talk with the partner on, okay, how do we how do we exit this relationship and give them enough funding, like kind of like a runway to head in another direction. So we don't focus specifically on religious organizations, but obviously faith actors play a critical part of civil society and every single aspect of the work that we support. And they're often the key to successful or failed peace, as Mary was getting at earlier. And so through the nature of our relationships with local peace actors around the world, almost everyone we engage with is religious in some way or form. And so almost everyone is a religious actor in that they have a belief system that they ascribe to. And then they also are connected to larger, faith communities that are often central hubs for change in their community. And so I that's just by way of introducing kind of who HU is and what we're trying to do specifically with peace building. I think one of the things I want to talk about the 25,000, the less than 25,000 question, because I think that's been, interestingly enough, our grants we used to have fewer grantees at large amounts, and now that we are focusing much more on locally based peace builders, we work by theme, not necessarily by country. Our grant size has gotten smaller and smaller, and so as Alex was saying, there definitely are there's a small number of us out there that are actively looking to fund at a smaller amount. It definitely creates more work, but that's one of the things that we're trying to do, just as a U.S. funder, is to do things differently in terms of how we learn, how we're engaging our local partners, what we're requiring from them, making sure they get to actually focus on the work they want to do and not overburdened with reporting and paperwork. And so as a result, it takes a bit more work on our side, which sometimes means if you try to schedule a meeting with us, it might get scheduled out 2 or 3 weeks just because of the amount of work that goes into each. We're trying to take on much more work that the grantee would normally do in order so they can actually do their impactful work locally.
Can I say something to what Jesse just said, Mary? I think it builds on what he just said, and also I think answers perhaps one of the last questions I'm seeing here in the chat. And I know there's another one above it, so we should answer that as well. But I think one of the things that I'm constantly surprised by is that there seems to be sort of this divide between the funders over here and then the grantee partners over here, and I'll speak from the funder perspective, because that's PSFG is a coordinating hub for the funders. Funders are people too. They are experts in their own right. They are passionate. We could be working in the private sector, making millions of dollars, but actually we're working in a nonprofit, just like you are. We have money, we have power in that sense, for sure. And we're here to help you. We are here to facilitate your good work. And I say that only because with the M&E, Jesse just said it, HU has M&E experts on their teams. Grantee partners could say, look, PSFG is 4 people. We are 4 people. You have 25% of PSFG right now in front of you. When we can't do something, we ask our members, and we say, look, I don't have an HR person. I'm the HR person. I'm the communications person. I'm the M&E person, all of that. And so we just say, hey, can I talk to your M&E person? You have someone on staff. Could you help? Could you can you actually, and actually a lot of people don't, the functional people within foundations don't get asked a lot. It's really sad and surprising because they have such expertise and they're there and they're willing to help. They want to help. And so I think part of it is you don't need to have that M&E, HR, legal, whatever the hell expertise in your own tiny nonprofit. You could have a conversation with your funder, a prospective funder, and say, look, I think we're a really good fit for this program. Unfortunately, we don't have an M&E person. We're, a tiny organization. Could you put me in touch with your M&E person to talk about how we might put forward a proposal? And most of the people, I will say, in the PSFG network will jump at that opportunity to help support you. I mean, it's such an honor to be able to do that. And like, yes, I want to support, there are things that you can say like, I'm sorry, I don't have that thing. But most of the time, like a simple conversation of just that, of like, this is my need and you have this, could we have a communication instead of just like, oh, well, like the thing on the website says this thing, like, I guess we can't apply, or, I don't know. It seems like, I mean, you two, Flora and Jesse, you two are actual, funders, like program people in the foundations. I mean, is something like that something that you would be able, and Mary too, do you get those calls? Would you be okay with something like that?
Oh, go ahead, Flora.
Yeah, obviously. So short answer, yes. And I think almost all the partnerships that we engage in with local partners start way before the application, actually. So you talk about their plans and about their dreams and see where you can be, where you can facilitate that. So when there's actually text on paper to be written, you sort of have already decided whether you would want to support this person or organization anyway, and then you're part of that writing process if needed, definitely. Yeah, but and also I think the whole new wave of discussions around decolonizing aid, locally led, etc., is very much helping in this sense. But definitely, I also recognize the struggle very much. So I hear this from our grantees a lot, especially when it's about government funding. But I don't know if that's a fair distinguishment to make. Yeah.
Thanks. Jesse, do you want to chime in?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, like we don't give grants to organizations because they're amazing at M&E. We give them grants because they're amazing at the work that they're passionate about. And so then we find the burden falls on us to make sure that we can meet our own requirements, that we have to report to the IRS and all sorts of things. But that means the burden's on us. That we have to do the work so that of all the back end aspects of it, so that our partners can focus on what they want to do. And I think one of the things that we've started doing over the past year, particularly working with partners where English isn't even a second language, it's maybe a third or fourth or fifth language, and people that are from predominantly oral cultures, is we'll have a Zoom call and we'll just record it, and that call is the report. Like that's all. It's a conversation. As far as the partner is concerned, it's a conversation. We then will take the information they provided and plug it into, our own reporting that we need for our own paper trails. But that frees up the partner to do the work they love to do. And so I think that's always the challenge I want to put to every donor. And we're not the best at this. We're trying to do better. We're not great at it for a long time. But it's the challenge I put to any donor, large or small. Like, stop putting the burden of monitoring and evaluation and learning on the grantee. Like, let them do the work they're good at doing.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'll add, from our side, we're the funding for IRA was $2.5 million annually. So even like, it was a very small amount. And so when we engaged with partners, it was this understanding that GHR would not be able to support them. That we had a portfolio of over 30 partners. So you can do the math. But what we asked them was, what is it that, like, how can I use my resources to help you get new attention? Right. So it's that, how can we help you? What's the story that you want to be able to tell? And so a lot of it was just sort of teasing out, like, what is it that you're trying to get out of, why are you doing these programs? What is it that you're trying to tell about your community? The opportunity to weave that social cohesion, right? Like, so I think for me, it always fell back to, how do I make sure I'm sharing my partner stories, the stories that I'm hearing from the ground, and then how am I making sure that they're enabled through the grant? Like, we wanted to say, like, if that's the key part of what's stopping you from attracting local donors, right? Like the companies that are giving money at the local level, let's figure out how to make sure that you're on their radar. And Jesse, do you work at all with the Frameworks Institute project?
No.
No. Okay. Alex Do you know about the framework?
Yeah. I know of them. I think it's good. Are you going to say a little bit more about them?
I know very little.
This is
But
a
I know,
storytelling entity.
yeah, the
Yeah.
Frameworks Institute is a storytelling entity, but I know they're working with Humanity United, and it's what I understand. It's mostly sort of an Africa focused pilot that they're running, and I don't know that they would call it a pilot, but there are organizations out there that really want to be able to help local community-based organizations tell that story.
Yeah, it's focused on narratives of peace
Narratives.
building. I don't manage that particular part of it, so I don't
Right.
have like deep knowledge of it. But it's part of a larger body of work on shifting narratives around peace building to make peace building more, to make sure that, because in our view, everyone is a peace builder, and it's gotten too overly specialized, and so it's really about how do you shift narratives and bring stories forward about people doing real peace building, even though that may not be their career.
Right. Which goes back to I think it goes back to this next question. They said most faith-based organizations and faith actors have long-term callings that are not always focused on a single project, and they need general support and capacity building support. But finding a donor to do that long-term accompaniment is really difficult. So the question is, as donors, how do you reflect on providing long-term support, and what do you look for as success from these programs? And quickly, I'll just say, when GHR had this program, our partnerships were always at least 5 to 10 years long. Like, we always knew that change was slow, and we needed to sit with our partners for a while. But Jesse, I'll turn to you, and then Flora.
Yeah, so we've been trying to make a very intentional shift towards providing more general operating support, but it's also we try to follow where the potential partner wants to go and what they want to do. We definitely have grantees that will specifically request a project grant, which may seem crazy to some people, but that's what they need. Either because they're part of a larger entity or whatever the case may be, but we try to tailor based on what they need. We're trying to provide much more long-term general operating support, because, as multiple people have pointed out in this session and in multiple other spaces, like, change doesn't happen in a 12-month grant timeframe. And so we have to start looking in 5, 10, 20, thinking in decades, basically, is what we're trying to get ourselves into a position to do. With that, in terms of, like, we try to define success based on what the partner defines as success. So what does peace look like in their community, or in their context? And so that involves, a much deeper conversation. It involves spending a lot of time just building relationships and building the trust and just investing in that relationship and in that individual or that collection of individuals. Because as we've tried to move much towards a trust-based philanthropy approach, which is way more than just unrestricted support, but that is a key element of it. You have to be able to understand who you're giving to, just not only understanding the work they do, but who are the individuals that are involved. And so sometimes that can be a time-consuming process, but it's worth it in the end, because you're able to invest with confidence, knowing that the people you're working with are in it for the long haul, and you have built the trust to be able to have difficult conversations with each other, where they can call you out and you can raise issues with them as well, and knowing that you're not going anywhere, and so I think that's one of the great benefits, but it takes a lot. It's definitely a lot of work, and it's a lot of private donors in particular are moving that direction, but it's slow progress because of the amount of just person hours that it takes to build that trust.
Right. Thanks. And we dropped a link to the trust-based philanthropy. That is a conversation, as an active conversation that's going on in the philanthropy world about how we can remove burden from our grantees, how we can be better listeners as funders. So I encourage peace building community organizations to understand that. And when you get the opportunity to talk to a funder, drop that in. it's actually, you're holding it helps if you hold us to accountability as well. And Flora, I'll go over to you. What do you look for? Do you provide long-term support, and what do you look for as success from these programs?
Yeah, so actually now we have used 2021 and 22 to sort of develop new programs for our core core countries. And these are 10-year programs, and we are looking to link local partners that we most of the time already work with to these programs, and bring them in, of course, from the design stage onwards, and then so also with the intention to do this together for the coming 10 years, starting January 2023. So that's pretty long-term support, but it's not, well, it's not as unconditional maybe as Humanity United does this, because we do all have a role to play in this program, both Mensen met een Missie, so myself, based on also the requests of the local partners, what do you want from us? But then local partners also have to take up a role in this whole, country-based theory of change. But when we actually find each other in this change that we're seeking and the strategy towards that, then definitely the cooperation will be for 10 years. And obviously sometimes there's sort of a window of opportunity for supporting a one-time event or one-time, a person that contributes just a bit, but usually the partnerships in these programs will be for 10 years. Yeah.
Thanks for that. You bring up another important point. When people are looking at websites of foundations, some will be more, I think, what we could refer to as operating organizations, which I feel like Mensen met een Missie falls more into the operating foundation, meaning that they have programs that they're implementing, but they're looking for partners and they make small grants as well. Whereas Jesse and I fall into the more traditional funding space, where we make grants. We don't actually implement projects and then look for partners for those. So thank you for that. Alex, is there anything you wanted to add? I felt like you were leaning in.
No, I was leaning. I'm always leaning in.
Yes, it's true.
I dropped a few things in the chat for folks, just because I think a lot of the questions. So there is a whole. Are you seeing the Q&A chat? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Good. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure who could see what. But yeah. I know a lot of the questions, and Jesse and Flora just talked about the sort of some of the challenges about general operating support, long-term support. We talked about trust-based philanthropy. These are not, they're really important, and they are not unknown factors. I mean, I put 2 links to reports from PSFG's locally led peace building working group from 2015. I think we did them 7 years ago, 7, 8 years. It was a long time ago. They don't have dates on them. I checked, but the idea behind these 2 reports was more people need to be funding locally, long-term, general operating support, all the things that we're talking about now. And what year is this? 2022. So they're not unknown. There are just, so we wrote this report of, what are the challenges was the first part. And then the second report is like, here's how you overcome those challenges to do the things that we're all doing as, locally led peace builders. And slowly but surely, I think Flora or Jesse, one of the 2 of you mentioned the decolonizing aid. I think it was Flora conversations, and Jesse, you mentioned trust-based philanthropy. These are new as of 3 years ago. These are new thrusts. And I think part of it is, I don't know, the downgrade of democracy around the world, of civil society being eroded. Trump was a big shock to Americans. Most of the funding is in America, coming from America. So I think a lot of funders were like, oh my gosh, this is happening here. We now understand. So this is all there. COVID. There were a lot of factors that came together in the past 2 or 3 years. I've been in this in this work for 16 years. So I have the sort of longer term perspective. And only in the past 2 or 3 years, during sort of the beginning of the COVID pandemic, is when like trust-based philanthropy, decolonizing aid, all of this stuff started coming together, and funders started actually slowly but surely shifting to doing more general operating support, more flexible, whatever it is. And so I think I come with the perspective of being in the space for a long time and saying the change is happening. We know what the problems are, and it's just taking a long time. But most recently, it's become accelerated, which is a good thing. And it's still going to take a little while longer. And there's lots of reasons why, but it is happening. I have seen it in my career so far.
Thanks for that, Alex. There was a question about young organizations and how they can sort of learn M&E capacity, because I'm guessing they're seeing that demand in funding opportunities that they're looking at. I know there was a 3 cups of tea exercise this morning that was more of an introduction to monitoring and evaluation. What I would say is you don't need an expert on M&E most of the time. Again, I think we talked about this, that foundations are interested in supporting that, in providing funding to attend to training if your organization really wants to develop that arm in their organization, or foundations will often accompany you and sort of you'll work on M&E together. But does anyone else? I know there's a ton of resources out there, and I know the Alliance for Peacebuilding Learning and Evaluation website is a great resource to start with. But Jesse and Flora, have you guys seen anything in your regions or areas that you would recommend?
Yeah, definitely. And actually, whenever I hear an assertion about how, local organizations, whether they be in the U.S. or anywhere around the world, religious actors, you hear an assertion that they don't have the capacity or the tools to do learning, which I like to call it just learning, because like learning is how you actually achieve better results in your community. The monitoring evaluation is just for donors, and I don't find it a very useful framework. But I actually, whenever I hear that local organizations don't have the capacity, I reject that assertion, because maybe groups aren't doing monitoring evaluation the way that a US based donor is directing it, but they actually do it quite well. They know what success looks like. And I would point to work so we're currently funding a consortium of local and international NGOs, and it's also co-funded by the State Department, called the Grounded Accountability Matrix. And it's a model that seeks to embed a culture of accountability within M&E practices of INGOs, to ensure that they're not extractive and that they're following how local communities define peace. And so, it's more than just having a one-off listening session where you get to check a box and say, yes, I talked to the community, but it's the community and the locally based organizations that are defining what success looks like. And then the entire model is built around that. And so that's something that we're excited. That's so Search for Common Ground is working on that. Everyday Peace Indicators, like I said, the State Department, and it's been really exciting to kind of watch this start to develop. But it's much needed in terms of changing the paradigm to putting the burden on local actors, and instead putting it on international NGOs and donors. Like, we need to step up, and we need to be doing the work that should not be put on a local peace builder. If you want monitoring and evaluation, do it yourself. I think we have to be better at taking this on and working and walking side by side. There's definitely information that needs to come from local partners, but I think we as a funding community need to do better at walking alongside and making sure that if you perceive the capacity is not there, then the burden's on you to get it there.
Thanks, Jesse. Flora, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so I want to broaden the question a little bit to sort of capacity in general, because the faith actors that you choose to work with are usually of importance because they're remote, they're in the communities, they're usually by themselves or, you know, with an organization of 2 or 3 people. So the burden definitely of monitoring and evaluation, like hardcore, should not be on them. But I think a big here my lack of, you know, English being my first language, lack of capacity, I don't want to say that word, but at least the thing that they usually indicate that they miss is network. So they're often so isolated and doing their work and very much in danger because they you know they are above the community because they stand out because of their work and also in the forefront that they usually do. So I think what we can do as funders is not necessarily provide capacity building and trainings on monitoring and evaluation, but definitely provide access to the networks that we have on the ground or internationally, or put a spotlight on these, well, religious actors who are also human rights defenders and very important activists, so that they're less in danger, or connect them to a wider religious network so that they're so that they're more protected, etc. So I think the whole capacity building is much more than knowing what an output or an outcome is.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for mentioning that the religious networks or the interreligious networks that are out there. I think if you're in that space, it's very evident to you how rich and widespread they are. But if you're a Catholic sister in a very small village in Indonesia, you may not know that there's a wider network that you could access of interfaith, multi-religious, and yeah, making, especially like where we sit, being able to make those connections is critical. Flora, I want to go back to you because we got a question about, do private foundations coordinate with institutional donors like USAID, GIZ, BMZ, CETA, et cetera? And what does collaboration or coordination look like? And I don't know if you want to talk about the GISRA project here.
Yeah, so I'm from the Netherlands, so our part of our funding is also from the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and that's actually very good. They very much stimulate the cooperation between the program that they fund and the local embassies, for example. So this GISRA program is on freedom of religion and belief, and how faith actors and religious actors can play a role in furthering freedom of religion and belief and peace on the ground in 7 countries. And the Dutch government really provides sort of access to their local networks and knowledge, and definitely embassy staff, so that they can help where they can. They're as everyone is very understaffed usually, but I think that's very good. So for example, in Kenya, they would provide space for meetings, or join on a field visit, or things like that. And with that, they sort of also provide indirect or direct diplomatic support to this program. So beyond finances, this partnership is really helpful. Yeah.
Thanks. And how was that? How was GISRA started?
It was just a call, the sort of the Dutch civil society call that comes out every 5 years, and we have formed a consortium around this topic of freedom of religion and belief with Search for Common Ground, Faith to Action Network, and Tier Fund. So it's an interreligious setup, and we have provided a concept note together, and we wrote this together with our local partners in the 7 countries that we are working in. And then we were invited to provide a full proposal, and that this was very much also in communication with. So that's where the MOFA, the ministry, already came in. Actually, the talks with their department in the Netherlands, in The Hague, but also the embassy input was already provided before we even submitted the full proposal. Yeah.
Thanks. And Jesse, has Humanity United collaborated with any of those government funded?
Definitely with USAID. We, to my knowledge, have well, I guess we did work with the entity formerly known as DFID, and a few years ago on related to some work on the combating human trafficking side. But yeah, with USAID, there's kind of a constant stream of communication on a number of different fronts. But there's been pooled funds that we've supported. There's a lot of talk about what localization can actually look like, connecting folks that we work with to folks within AID, so they can get a sense of outside of the AID bubble, kind of what does this look like, and so I think Floor's point on connecting, using our role as a connection point, as a kind of like network weaving, I think is so critical, and it's one of those one of the most important things that we can offer beyond the check is that using the power that we have as Western-based donors to sometimes like force our way into a conversation, or in a more polite way, just make connections between people to say, oh, you have this need, here's someone that can meet that need, and here you two meet. I think that point is so critical, and it often goes missed in the conversations about what donors can provide.
Thanks. And Alex spoke about the I just want to get the name right. It was the Central African Republic Interfaith Peacebuilding Partnership. And that was, I think you're right, 2015, and that was a USAID and GHR funded. And it was really to support the capacity of the Interreligious Council in Central African Republic. And it was building on that opportunity, right? Like they had just, a peace agreement had just been reached, and what was the role that faith actors could continue to play in that, in ensuring peace. But I can drop a link in there. It was related to CRS as well, Catholic Relief Services. I want to go there. Thank you for dropping all the questions in the Q&A. We will get to them. I want to make sure that yesterday there's a panel on youth and women involved in peace building. And I'm just wondering, Floor and Jesse, what approaches do you employ to ensure, or do you employ approaches to ensure voices of women and youth are part of your programming, or where do you see them in the continuum of partners? Floor, I'll go to you first.
Yeah. So we make sure, of course, that part of our programs are focused on well, not necessarily women, but gender equality, where you need, of course, everyone, and youth inclusion, or promoting the agency of youth in the programs. So I think usually in the countries where we work with like 10 local partners, and there's most of the time there's one or two youth-led organizations, and for sure many women-led organizations. And especially when you work with faith-based organizations and religious actors, definitely the voices of women tend to be overlooked. So you need to be sort of extra aware that they are, well, not only around the table, but actually are actively participate, obviously. We have part of our program is programming is around countering gender-based violence, which is very much a program focused on shifting norms. And there, I think the importance of religious actors is really big. They are sort of, they're usually the local influencers, if you will. So they can make or break norms where they are, definitely also by using their sort of moral authority or moral compass role, and even using religious texts, which is just a little bit of cherry picking here and there, where all texts can be used to either downgrade or empower women. So that the whole role of religion in gender equality type of programs is, I think, oftentimes overlooked and very important factor for change. Yeah.
Thanks, Flor. Jesse, same question.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's an absolutely critical, it's not even just a lens, it's just like a way of being. And we try to, we're very intentional about it. And I think, I wouldn't say we have a specific gender or youth lens, but the majority of our grants are women or youth-led organizations. And I think when you align on values and approaches, it's no surprise that women and youth have often the most insights and inroads into the communities where we're working, or rather where they're working. And I think, I'm thinking about an example from South Sudan, where we support a network of young peace builders, the majority of which are women. And when I say youth, I mean people under 40 predominantly. And one of the things that we've seen recently is a young man and a young woman from the same geographic area but from different ethnic groups have been working very closely with traditional religious leaders, and who are mostly old men, and they saw the intergenerational influence that these religious leaders could have on either ending or fomenting or encouraging violence. So they started engaging them and connecting them together, kind of one at a time, and it's been just such I think a classic example of why paying attention to women and youth can have such an impact, because particularly as violence flared up in multiple different areas in this geographic region of South Sudan this year, the areas that they connected with, by and large, saw much less incidences of violent conflict, much less cattle raiding, but and it was in part because of the connections that this young man and this young woman created between these traditional religious leaders, and so it's just kind of a reinforcement of the importance of taking that approach. But like I said, there's not necessarily an intentionality to it, but when I look at it, there's no surprise that the majority of our grantees are majority women and youth led.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for that. Alex, I'm going to turn to you on what you're hearing in the Peace and Security Funders group as far as working with youth and a focus on women and women leadership. I will say that when I worked with organizations, it would always, I would ask that question, who's on your leadership? How do you listen to voices that aren't getting space? If you're trying to address peace in your community, that's peace for everyone. And so they are issues that I think funders think about. And so be prepared to answer them. Be thinking about how you engage youth and women's voices. It's not just about serving them. It's as much as it's about our accompaniment with you, it's about your accompaniment. And I think again, that's why I said it in the beginning, faith actors are so embedded in their community. They know everyone. They've watched those children be born. They probably blessed them. So that the resources that you've already invested in them. So keep them at the table. Alex?
Yeah. No, I think that I won't add any more to what Flor and Jesse said, but I will say that there is a whole nother. So the map does have youth and children and women as population served, but it's the map is not perfect, but it is a way to sort of see the intersections there. What I was going to say is that there's a whole. I'm going to put it in the chat. There you go. Elevate Children Funders Group. There's a whole funders group that is specifically working with, I know there's so many different like funder, but actually like, I will say the beautiful thing about a funders group is that, there are 60 of you, there's a tiny bit of money. We need to make the money go the longest way and the most effective way, and to learn from one another. So I'm a big believer in funders groups, but there is an Elevate Children's Funders Group that convenes together, and GHR, I think, was on the board of it, yeah. That convenes funders together who are really focused on elevating the voices of children and youth within sort of ways of funding. So there's that. So I would encourage everybody to check that out, because they also have resources and publications and lists of their members. So for those that are interested. And then the second thing I'll say is, as Jesse alluded, there are conversations very explicitly happening in the US, I imagine more globally, but I'm based here in the US, so I can only speak from that perspective around, diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and we add sort of letters, justice and accountability. But the idea that, it can't just be like old white men doing the decision-making and creating the context and all of that. And so those conversations, like the ones I mentioned earlier, around general operating support, long-term support, trust-based philanthropy, those are also pretty new in the funder world. I would say the past, 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years. Some entities have been having those conversations and intentionally focusing on your, underrepresented communities longer. But, the American expression is like better late than never. It's conversations that are really active and really accelerated most recently. And I think that includes, gender equality, obviously, including youth in conversations as well. So it's one of those things I would be remiss if I didn't mention that those are also very active and rightfully difficult conversations, because it's not the way in which things used to be done, before. And they're great conversations to be having. And we've been having them within the PSFG network now for over 5-6 years. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Alex. That I feel like this part builds into the question about it says the interfaith peace building field is really big. What are the key areas that your organizations are interested or focused on funding? And I think you've already touched upon some of this, Jesse and Fleur. And Alex, you talked about it from, nuclear security down to community development. And that is part of I think that is part of the issue that, are you looking for peace building funding, or are you looking for community development funding? And the funders in the community development funding, they don't necessarily see their work as peace building. I will say that like one of the early workshops that I attended when I first started working with GHR was on the Connexus platform, and it sort of talked about, it's really important for organizations to think about, where are you entering a conflict? Is it pre-conflict when there may be a spark and you're trying to prevent that spark from lighting? Is it during the conflict? Is it post-conflict? And so I always sort of bring that lens into conversations when I'm talking to organizations, saying, well, what is it? Which end of the process are you trying to address? Because the peace building field does have a whole scientific background to it, at least. And there's rich resources that we don't get access to because we might not speak the languages that other resources are printed in. But Jesse and Fleur and Alex, curious, I have to go back to the question now, and I lost it. Are there any other key areas, or would you say anything about the peace building field in general, and what you're seeing that new organizations to the space, perhaps faith actors that you've worked with, and how they're sort of approaching the peace building space? And Jesse, I'll go to you first.
That's actually a tricky question.
Well, even like if you look at the South Sudan example,
right. Well, I think what's interesting, actually, so that's where my mind was going with the South Sudan example, because the majority of the people in that network are not professional peace builders. I mean, like,
Right.
one guy works for a mobile phone company, another guy, like these are people who, just by their very personality, by the way they engage their communities, like, people are attracted to them, and they are galvanizing people, and they want to connect with others around the country, and so it's been exciting watching them work, and also it's created a very good challenge for us in terms of, as our own strategy and approach evolves, like making sure that we're not being too narrow in how we're defining peace building. So I would say one of the most successful things we've seen in the past year from South Sudan is, again, from a woman who would not call herself a peace builder. She's an entrepreneur. She she and several other young women just started saving money together. They opened a restaurant and a club together. And yet, when you look at what they've done with this physical space, it's the embodiment of peace building, right? So, for instance, it was named one of the safest places to be in Juba, which is no small feat.
Wow.
But like, let me just give you, so if anyone gets into a fight or an argument, they are the rest of the people in the bar or the club will make them you have to buy a round of drinks for everybody. And if you refuse to buy a round of drinks, they'll take your cell phone and say, you can come back and get this tomorrow. But they basically just have community accountability there, like, where, like, if you know that if you go to this restaurant and this club, like, there's not going to be violence there. Like, everyone is here just to be together, and she did it very intentionally. But she also, one of my colleagues was like, "Oh my, like, what an amazing example of peace building." She's like, "But I'm not a peace builder. I'm just a businesswoman," But I think it's important to be able to broaden the lens out and to be able to see things well beyond yes, peace building is rooted in a lot of kind of social science and there's a lot of rigor that went into creating the field. But at the same time, as I look around the partners that we're supporting, I'm not sure all of them would define themselves as peace builders, but yet they are having a profound impact on transforming cycles of violence into cycles of something else, so that the next time something that might trigger violence comes up, it's less likely to happen because people are connecting and building relationships and working towards some sort of shared goal together. And I think that's what's been a good challenge for us, is making sure that we are being as expansive as possible in what we're defining as a peace builder, and supporting work that is transforming violence, no matter what the sector or field or community.
What I wrote down to remind myself what I was going to say, and Jesse said it perfectly, is like, language. You don't define yourself as peace builders. And I think that's probably part of the reason why peace and security is so small. Like, when you put it by the numbers, it's less than 1%, as I've been saying forever. And we need more funding. And it's true. And it is, like, actually very underfunded, as everyone out there knows. But some things that we might not say is peace building actually is peace building, and vice versa. Some funders, part of what we try and do as the PSFG Secretariat is convince other funders to come into the space and work with incredible organizations like Mensen met Missie and Humanity United and GHR. That's our other 57 members. And a lot of them are like, yeah, we don't do peace building. We do X, Y, and Z. And we're like, no, but that is peace building. And they just say, oh, well, we're not peace funders. We're not peace funders. And so I think, language is really important. And sort of I go back to what Flora is saying, that the way in which Mensen met Missie operate is you have conversations with people ahead of time. And so you're having conversations, so you kind of get to, and kind of Jesse's perfect example, demonstrate sort of that communication is really important. And I know, as I'm saying this, that when grantee partners submit applications, you have to still concretely write down what you're doing to submit it in many ways. And so that is the challenge, is how do you say, everything we're doing is peace building, but nothing we're doing is peace building. And it's actually this thing. And you have to like kind of get into the exact, the silo, I guess, of the funder and how they describe it. But I guess that's what I would like end and say, however the funder is describing their work, if you think it is work that you are also doing and you match up, then use that language, get in the door, and then sort of have the conversations about the actual work and whatever you define it. It doesn't much matter. Actually, that was one of the hard things for the peace and security funding map, is how do we define peace building? And it took us, we had an outside panel of grantee partners, we had the funders, we had, not the statisticians, but the data people. And we had to make a decision of what is the taxonomy behind when you guys search for peace building. Like, there are actual words that we had to decide on what counts as peace building, but it's so much more. Anyway, the language is really important, and it's both an opportunity and a challenge.
Yeah. Laura, is there anything that you wanted to add to that, an example?
Yeah, well, I think there's some huge challenges also in funding peace building activities and religious actors. Is that it's peace building, well, just as Jesse and Alex are saying, is it's about people. So how do we as funders not contribute to sort of the NGOization or projectization of peace building interventions? That's, well, just calling it intervention is already, wrong. It's not some time limited path towards improvement, and it's sometimes so intangible. So it's really hard and very necessary to find people that are key to peace in a certain context, and not a perfect NGO or organization. And I think another challenge is prevention. The whole prevention of conflict. You feel that there's tension, but how do you know that you've actually contributed to preventing conflict? That's very hard to claim, because your measurement is nothing happened, but you don't know what else would have happened. So that's I think a big challenge for peace funders, and it's a lot about immaterial support. So it's a lot about talking and the personal touch, and it is also for funders a big time investment to really enter into this dialogue with local actors before even a project or an activity or whatever can start. So there's some challenges, and also the final aspect that I want to say is leave the capital. Peace building hardly, in lobby terms definitely, and campaign terms, but besides that, it's the remote places, the rural places where the actual peace building, muddy peace building happens. And there's so many funders that have no means, time, capacity to go beyond the capitals of the countries. Yeah.
Thanks, Fleur. I feel like that leads into Susie Hayward's question. She was wondering, and we haven't, the questions have been great. We haven't been talking a lot about specifically about funding faith actors or opportunities and problems with doing that. But she wondered is it better to lead into a project pitching sort of a multi-religious action frame, or lead with other funding priorities, refugee support, reproductive health care, public health campaigns, and then fold the multi-religious approaches into that. Susie's sense is that we'll find more success for funding while also helping to ensure multi-religious action work is not siloed as a niche field. And Susie Hayward she was with USIP, now she's at Harvard. So that's just in case anyone didn't know. But yeah, curious about that. So Susan, I would feel like you know your audience. right? Like, are they already funding? Have they funded in the multi-religious space? Are they interested in that? If they're not, if they're because a lot of funders are very issue oriented, and it doesn't really matter who's doing the work, but then you can bring the added value of the multi-religious approach. But Flora and Jesse, what have you guys seen? Or Alex, what have you seen? Just sort of that automatic,
Yeah.
don't talk. I don't know what you're talking about, this multi-religious approach.
Yeah, I mean, the funny phrase which is true that I've heard like early on in my career in the philanthropic sector is, one funder.
Right.
Like, depends on the funder. I don't know, like what you said, Mary. It also depends on like, on the one hand, you want the money to do your thing, the project, your work. On the other hand, do you want to join PSFG in trying to move the community slowly to do, to be better funders because they're thinking more contextually across issue? Like, that's what we're trying to do. It is a long process, as I've been sort of mentioning throughout. So part of it is you want to do both. So you want to, meet them where they are, know your funder, and then say, and also, by the way, like, you get the money, you're doing the project, and say, hey, by the way, like, let us educate you now, because actually, like, we got the money as a peace building grant, but also what we're doing is, whatever it is, community engagement, refugee support, blah, blah, blah. So you can go to a healthcare funder and get money and then say, haha, also you're doing peace. By the way, you're doing peace, and slowly start to change the way in which they conceptualize their work.
Yeah, thanks. Jesse or Flor, you want to jump in on that? You can say no.
What Alex said.
Okay. Thanks. I had a thought. The other, and it's sort of answering two questions. And one is, a lot of people don't know that faith actors are networked. And networks are incredibly strong. And we go so much further when we're in community and we're talking to each other. And so I feel like everybody on this call can educate funders as they go forward to say, again, Susie, to your point, that there are multi-religious approaches. I mean, they're at the UN now. USAID is doing a big thing on them, but yet they still, like, so often still what you see the funding is like going into one community, one faith actor. And it's like, how much more could you have done with those, those precious dollars if you had thought about, like, what is the network that actor sits in? What are the opportunities, across that country or across that issue? What can they learn from faith actors that are doing that same work, but in another country? And how do you support that network? Because networks always need supported. Like, we're talking about peace building funding, but network funding is even less, I feel like, in some ways. So I just wanted to add that in. Okay, we are slowly coming to the end of our time. There's a question: what advances are you seeing now on the frontier of innovative peace building funding? As we see non-traditional funders break into this space and non-traditional peace building programs develop that integrate peace building in other fields like tech. And Jesse, I feel like you've spoken a little bit to this, like innovative, like it's a restaurant, but it's a restaurant that says no violence here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole aspect of our strategy that we talk about. We call it new mechanisms, and it's basically exploring what are ways for particularly local peace builders to share with each other and also kind of gain a foothold and an access to larger global conversations. And so that can be in digital spaces or in physical spaces. It also means kind of, if they have an idea they want to try, like, that's kind of like our pot of money to, like, let's try this out, and so some of that, a lot of it involves different kinds of technology, but a lot of it is just like ideas that a group has had, and they're like, we really want to try this based on our experience. It's like, okay, well, and it usually is not a lot of money for them to try to test it out, and so there's the kind of space that we've created that was really just carved out by our partners, and we just followed where they were going, to be able to try things that I don't know if they would be. I mean, yes, maybe they're innovative, but it's often just rooted in very deep wisdom that's maybe existed forever in that community, but has never been able to be actually put to the test in a way that shows like, oh wow, this is having a tremendous impact on not just reducing violence, but on moving towards some sort of positive peace in that community. And again, working towards what peace looks like to that community.
Thanks, Jesse. Fleur? Innovative, and seeing any innovative work with the GISRA project or other programs that you're working with?
Well, within GISRA and beyond, I think there's many donors are increasingly inclined to sort of experiment with this sort of participative grant making type of models where local actors can actually take decisions over where funding goes, etc. So that's something that we try, but also see others try and do.
Right.
And what I also see is that there seems to be sort of more integration of different sectors in the peace building sector. So I think there's many organizations who build on knowledge and experience from behavioral insights, or from psychology, or even from marketing. So how to convince people and to how to use that and apply that in peace building strategies. So I find that very interesting. And I also see a lot of interest in not like online peace campaigns or stuff like that, but the safety aspects of peace builders, and who are the digital safety aspects, which are very important, and many are not aware what risk they are at. So I think that's very important and pretty new and totally unknown to me.
Thanks. Alex, do you have any examples from? Okay. I mean, one of the things, I mean, I don't know, like this whole idea of innovation, right? I mean, a lot of what we've talked about today is like just deep listening in community, and, those closest to the problem know the solution. So this idea of like, it doesn't have to be catchy or like, I just worry about this term innovative. Like even Flora and I worked together on a preventing election violence and safe elections and transitions post-election on the Mombasa coast in Kenya last year. And one of the key components was just that making sure that it was working with religious actors, and meaning, women of faith, youth of faith, and then the people that are at the pulpit, but it was just making sure that they knew they were staying in touch with each other. So if a rumor started, they were on their WhatsApp phone and just saying, is this true? Like, tell me what, what's the real story? And they could diffuse those rumors. And that's innovative. Right? Like that's innovative for them, because they figured out a way to stay in touch and to ensure that the safety of their community was at the forefront. So I just want to temper the innovation, the bright shiny ball in the room or something like that. And thank you for the head nods. I appreciate that. Go ahead, Jesse.
Well, I was wondering, there's a question that Ann Hendricks Jenkins asked that I would love to get at, because I think it gets at multiple different points, and also gets, I think, to the topic at hand in terms of, in particular, like religious actors and funding religious actors. So the question was on, do we see a future in funding via networks of domestic organizations? Because in particular, Global South-based entities have a really hard time getting access to funding. And so I think the question was more about, do we have, can you fund networks of local organizations? And there's also, I think, a part in there of finding support without seeking foreign funding. And so there's just, that question really resonated resonates with me, because, you know, as I was saying at the beginning, you know, while we try to offer very flexible support in terms of flexible grants and tailoring funding to what the partner wants, there's also, you know, when we talk about accompaniment and how we show up and walk alongside partners and really ask the question, what serves, you know, what, and whether that's helping them, working with them, analyzing trends, or bringing together spaces to, you know, share ideas and wisdom, facilitate collaboration, make introductions, provide fundraising and other kind of support like translation. One of the critical things where we've been, where, you know, in particular, I've been highly focused is on network building and relationships. And, you know, so that includes funding convenings and spaces for local peace builders to come together and share what they're learning. And it goes back to this, you know, the fallacy maybe of innovation, that oftentimes what we might see, what, you know, me, white American donor, might see as, wow, that's so innovative, has been in place for centuries in a particular location. It's just never been heard. So very rarely are we, you know, discovering something. It's you know, so creating the space for, whether it's local faith actors, local peace actors, whoever it is, and often those can be one and the same. You know, these are spaces where people get to share their wisdom and their experiences, and also they get to function almost like a social movement, you know, building solidarity, issuing demands into the global system, and providing the space for people to discover their power. And this came up yesterday in the Women and Youth Peace Building session. I should add, you know, that people always have power. It's just a matter of, do they know they have it, and then how they decide to use it. But there are two really important lessons on networks, I think, go to what Anne's asking here. I think the first, and this goes to as you know, whether this is a donor or whether just things for you to consider as you're seeking funding, that at the end of the day, even, you know, religious actors, like, they may represent a larger faith belief system, but they are also human. And so there is this element of the importance of how we show up together, you know, the process by which people determine the norms and rules that guide their everyday life and behavior. And so this could be, you know, spoken and unspoken agreements that they have, rituals that they have to deepen their ability to work together. And so that can be how they choose to use resources together, how they choose to build systems and structures that reflect their values. And I think there are the kind of three critical questions that, no matter what, if I'm engaging with a network, whether it's, you know, formal or informal network, there are kind of three questions that I've learned to ask that kind of get to, how does this group show up together and work together? You know, the first is, what do you want to accomplish? Second is, how do you make decisions? And the third is, what do you do when you disagree? And one of the things I've learned from my own experience is, when both my parents were ordained ministers and worked for faith-based organizations, you know, their entire lives. Like I said, like, they're particularly like senior faith leaders, they sometimes you just defer to one individual, and that can be helpful in the short term, but it's, you know, kind of comes from network science. You talk about ego networks versus eco networks, and you might have one person that galvanizes the work and who brings the community together, but eventually they need to be able to disperse that power and be able to kind of share the load if the long-term change they seek is actually going to occur. And this gets to this kind of the second piece, which is what we talk about internally. We call it sufficiency, but it's going to sound familiar to many of you, which is the ability of local peace actors to use relationships and resources around them before they seek foreign funding. So, for example, in Colombia, there's a network called Territoria, which has formed a network of community foundations so that local communities can find support locally, and support work that best makes the Colombian peace deal a reality in their community. And that work is, you know, faith actors are essential in those communities, and are often the linchpins that are keys to bringing access. And so, you know, faith actors are critical as part of being that subsidiarity, where you look at, okay, what is the problem that we have? What's the issue we're trying to solve? What knowledge do I have? What about the people that I know in my network? And then just kind of like working out in concentric circles. And groups like the Global Fund for Community Foundations, the Africa Philanthropy Forum, and others have been really trying to push this idea. There's also the Local Coalition Accelerator, which is being tested in the kind of humanitarian space, but it's basically bringing together networks of local organizations that can receive USAID or other large multilateral funding. But they have to decide how they work together. And so kind of asking those questions and being prepared to answer those questions of how you show up together, how you make decisions, what you do and you disagree, enables you to kind of find support from your immediate area. But then also, if you find we have no other choice but to seek foreign funding, working as a network and a kind of a coalition of domestic organizations, I think is where I see just kind of huge growth potential in that area. Sorry, long answer, but I just Anne's question got me really excited.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you called it out. And we need to wrap, unfortunately, but Jesse, I think that was a great few words to wrap on. I appreciate my fellow panelists for making the time to be here with us today. And I encourage everyone to stick around for the conversation next. And then later, USAID is going to tell us how to get their funding. So stick around for that. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great morning or afternoon. Bye.
Thanks, Mary.